Welcome to Your Legislative Link, a program designed to connect you with your leaders at the state capitol. I'm your host, Brent Stoddard, the Public Affairs Director with the City of Glendale, and I'm honored to have with us today our Senate Majority Leader, Senator Kimberly Yee. Senator, thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here.
Great. So you represent District 20,
Yes.
which encompasses a large part of Glendale. In fact, it has three of our council districts, the Cactus, the Saguaro, and the Beryl District, and then heading to the west, a portion of western Phoenix as well. Tell us from your perspective a little bit about District 20 as you've gotten to know it over the years and what your impressions of the district are.
Well, I was born and raised right here in the district that I represent. So I'm born and raised in the West Valley, and I have chosen to raise my family here in the West Valley, as well as my husband and I have a business here as well. So we have stayed here all of these years, and it's important that someone who represents the district knows the district. And these were my stomping grounds from the very beginning. I have been pleased to see that our West Valley growth has really flourished over the past few decades.
Right.
And it's really been amazing to see how much housing development has been created, the businesses, all of the economic development. Really proud to see it grow.
Sure, and for those of us that moved here and kind of just lived into the growth, it must be amazing to see the area, particularly the West Valley, just develop organically over that period of time, and see not only with business and residential, but everything from schools to,
Yes.
I mean, what an amazing part of the valley to watch. So, and it's unique that you've been here as a native Arizonan for that time as well.
All these years, yes. I mean, I remember the various neighborhoods that we've had back by around Metro Center, growing all the way west, and there was West Valley Mall. I don't know if you remember it, but
Yeah.
it used to be there right off of Northern. I used to go to the movies there with my girlfriends, and so all of these years we've seen the West Valley continue to grow and grow. And I walk my precincts regularly during campaign season, and I talk to families, and they also have stayed in the area. So it's neat to see that where someone went to high school, they really didn't move that far away.
Right.
And they've stayed in that neighborhood. It says a lot about a neighborhood. It says a lot about the families and the people who live here in the West Valley.
Yeah, excellent. So you're the first Asian American woman that's been elected to the state legislature.
I am.
And you also hold the distinguished honor of being the second woman to be the Senate Majority Leader in the state legislature, alongside great leaders,
Yes.
Sandra Day O'Connor, who held that position in the early 70s. Congressional Quarterly and their roll call publication, which is a publication for Congress and other things. That's the leading publication, identified you as one of the, I think it was the top 25 rising stars in state politics. Do you feel, I mean, you must feel a sense of responsibility just anyways, representing citizens of Legislative District 20, but do you feel any additional type of responsibility when you hear those things or are given those honors or carry the mantle of being the first Asian American woman? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first, let me say I'm honored and I'm humbled to serve the people of Arizona, particularly to serve my district. And so when I did become elected in 2010, I was the first Asian American woman to be elected in our great state. And truly that is an honor. Not only do I represent our wonderful citizens, there is a particular community of Asian Americans out there who have never had a woman serving them in an elective office at the legislature, so truly it's an honor.
That's great.
But I enjoy reaching out to our diverse communities in Arizona. We have so many of them. And so when they see a woman who is a minority in a leadership role, I think it's important, no matter what their party affiliation is, to see that they too can hold any position, and there certainly should be no barriers. And having now serving as the Senate Majority Leader, and being only the second woman following Sandra Day O'Connor, our great U.S. Justice, and truly a trailblazer in her own right. It was 44 years that we didn't have a woman serving as Senate Majority Leader in our great state, and so this really is it's a responsibility that I hold very high. But I certainly do feel that there is a sense of being a role model to young women when we have these opportunities, and what we do, what we say, it's very important because they see us as examples. And I certainly, I think it's important that women should be in leadership positions. And I think women encouraging other young women is an important role that we have. In fact, I ran for office because a woman tapped me and she said, you know, you should consider running for office. So it was a woman asking another woman to take a leadership position. And truly, I think that is a responsibility that I hold and I take seriously.
Yeah, and that's great. And as a father of 3 daughters,
Oh, really? Yes.
you know, it was awesome to be able to tell them, hey, I'm going to sit down with the Senate Majority Leader, and it's Senator Kimberly Yee, and have them kind
That's
of recognize it's a
great.
woman. So yeah, we appreciate for your leadership.
And I come from a family of 3 daughters.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know what it's like to have, you know, 3 girls in a household. And I think that really is important, though, for parents to be able to say you can be anything you want in this great country. And no matter where you live, what zip code you come from, you can do anything. And there are so many opportunities and freedoms that we have. And really, that is something that we all in leadership positions should be able to go out, make the effort to go into our schools and our communities to talk about.
I agree. So you're here now, your leadership, but what prompted your start in politics? Was it, you know, something young or in college? Where did you start finding the passion for policy and politics?
It's interesting. I'd have to go back all the way to high school. I served as my class president for 3 out of my 4 years of high school.
Yeah.
And so you ran for office, you had your little campaigns, you handed out pencils that had your name on it. That really was truly, I think, a practice ground for me. I also was a Girl Scout, and when you're a Girl Scout, you hold sort of a leadership, you know, in service and all of these other practices that you do as a Girl Scout. You knock on doors and sell cookies, and you do cold calls when you're knocking on those doors. That's what I do now, you know, during campaign season, and you have no fear of talking, you know, to communities that you don't already know. And so it's that, I think those were sort of foundational things that I did when I was younger. And then I actually started working for elected officials. In college at Pepperdine, I would come back home for the summers in Phoenix, and I'd work for our county attorney at that time. Over the summers, I also worked at the U.S. Justice Department in Washington, D.C. Then after college, I had a professor who said you should take a year's break before grad school and go and work in Sacramento. Of course, I was in California for school at that time. And I worked for the governor of the state of California in the 90s. And it was a wonderful experience as a very young person right out of college to be a gubernatorial appointee to a very popular governor. And so at that time, that sort of taught me what it's like to work behind the scenes for an elected official. Then, when he was out of office, I came back home to work for the Arizona State Senate Education Committee. Right. And at that point, I worked for 30 members of the state Senate, both Republicans and Democrats. And as a committee research analyst, you are nonpartisan. You basically work with everybody. And what you do is you read all the bills that come before the committee, you analyze them, you put them into a fact sheet, which means it's layman's language, and you can really analyze a several hundred-page bill into and you create a one-page summary. And that was, interestingly, a teaching opportunity for me to later come and be an elected official in the very same building. Now, after the Senate, about 5 years in, I received a call from Sacramento again, and Governor Wilson was helping then Governor Schwarzenegger set forth his policy team. And so they were creating their cabinet, and they asked me to become the deputy cabinet secretary for various issue areas. And so I went back to Sacramento, lived there for couple more years, and worked for Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger as his deputy cabinet secretary. Again, another awesome opportunity to work behind the scenes, do the policy making, you know, provide briefings, give the options for where you go on policy proposals. Again, a teaching ground I never would have guessed would prepare me to become an elected official. Then came back to Arizona, worked for State Treasurer Dean Martin for his first term. And for 4 years, I worked as the State Treasurer's Communications Director. I also worked on legislative issues for the office. And that provided me, you know, an opportunity to kind of get back into my neighborhood. So I started knocking on doors, but for other candidates, and I got into the campaign side of this whole policy world. I had never done that before. And so I became the chairman of my Republican district, and at that time it was District 10, and it really showed me the other side of what the work I was doing. It was the campaign side of things. It was helping elect leaders. And so what I saw that was absolutely needed were leaders that we could trust, and leaders who would really, truly delve through the bills that we were determining policy on and creating laws for it. And I kind of felt at that time we had a few, opportunities to fill those positions with people who really did care about that stuff. And so a woman, like I said, named Linda Gray at that time, she was my state senator. She said, one day when I retire, I'd like to see that you take a look at this opportunity. And so 5 years later, I prayed about it, and I saw that the opportunity and the door was open, and I ran for office. And that was back in 2010, and I haven't looked back. I've been truly honored to serve in the position.
Yeah. So, I mean, it started really young. And I think that's one of the things that I notice as I've been working with you is you have a priority on education
Yes.
and kind of the civics of how our government works and why it's important, and you can tell because was the foundation and the framework of what brought you to where you are today.
Yes.
Just a few days ago, in fact, you were before the Arizona State Board of Education talking to them about a unique project that you've been working on with Sandra Day O'Connor and her group on increasing civics education throughout all of our school systems.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that and why you're involved in that and what the importance to education is.
Well, one of the things that I've had an opportunity to do, not only while I've served in office, but even before that time, is go into schools. My mother is a former public school teacher. She's taught in the elementary public school system for 38 years. And during the time she was a teacher, I'd go in, because your mom's a school teacher, you go in during a few days and you sort of see what the classroom's like. In her area where she taught, it was in one of the poorer areas in downtown Phoenix. And then over the course of time, I worked for various officials, and one of the portfolios I carried was education policy. So I went into schools, I talked to kids, and what did I learn? I learned that there are truly, opportunities to enhance what kids know about civics education. And I truly do believe that U.S. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor started that effort successfully back in 2009 following her retirement from the court. And she created a program, it's called iCivics, but there are so many other civics education courses for free that allow students to learn how their government works. And beyond that, it gives them appreciation of how we have this wonderful democracy in our great country. And so when we have the opportunity as legislators, you sort of have, the ability to have, talking points to where you can talk about things that matter. And so I went to the State Board of Education just a couple weeks ago, and I talked to them about this window of opportunity we have right now where they're creating the new framework for our social studies standards. And why can't we bring in additional civics education into our classrooms as they develop the standards for what students should be able to know and do by the end of each grade level? Right. So I believe civics education can be enhanced in Arizona. I think that we don't need to have additional funds per se to do it because there are so many free programs like Justice O'Connor's that can be incorporated into the classroom learning environment free of cost. I also truly believe that we need to increase our financial education in our system. And that's just simple, basic skills to teach kids how you balance a checkbook and how you spend your money so that we don't have students graduating out of our classrooms who go into debt, who don't even know the basic principles of managing their money. And I've sponsored legislation in the past. I've continued to promote that and am continuing to talk to the education officials about how we can enhance financial education as well.
So obviously one of your priorities. And you talked about being a leader yourself and the influences when you were younger. And you're not just out there providing leadership, you're helping to grow that, the new leadership that's going to carry Arizona forward, for decades from now. Yeah. And one of those areas that you talked about that had an influence on you is the Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
And you've been leading that effort as well. If I understand correctly, you actually started kind of a Girl Scouts women program, and you've also introduced legislation. A few years ago, you were successful in passing a bill creating a Girl Scouts Arizona state holiday to recognize the Girl Scouts, and then, of course, starting the allowing for the license plates for the Girl Scouts and girl youth empowerment programs, which also provides additional exposure and resources to them. So talk a little bit about those efforts and why those were important.
Well, again, it all started as a Girl Scout, and so I was a Brownie and then later a Girl Scout. And I've continued to work in Girl Scout troops. I talk to them about leadership, women in leadership. I talk to them about how they can serve their communities and how important it is. And I also talked to them about culture in my Asian culture, and you know, how we can work with so many other people in our great communities, with diverse communities, in fact. And so what I have done is I've worked with Girl Scout alumni, and I've you know, formed these partnerships. And one of the things we wanted to do was recognize Girl Scouts as they were celebrating their 100 years.
Right.
And so back, I believe it was in 2012, we created a bill that would recognize March 12th as a holiday, basically unpaid, but recognized as Girl Scouts Day. And that became law, and so March 12th is Girl Scouts Day because of this bill that I presented. And it was also an opportunity to take a look at how we can raise additional resources for these nonprofit organizations that are so important to women, to young women, and to our youth. And so I looked at what the Boy Scouts had done, and they had done their 100th year celebration, I think a couple years before the Girl Scouts. And what we did was we created a little license plate designed to look like, you know, Girl Scout theme license plate. And the proceeds, as people would order those, many former Girl Scouts are very interested in this, some of the proceeds go to the Girl Scouts organizations, so that they can continue to expand and grow their service projects. And so the Girl Scout license plate was a bill that I sponsored, and I also saw that there was this real interest in Girl Scout related issues by women of the legislature. And why was that? Because they were Girl Scouts too, including our former governor, Jan Brewer. And so I decided to form women's Girl Scout troop at the state legislature, and we called ourselves Troop 1920, which was recognizing the great year that women were granted the right to vote. So we had sashes made, and we met, and we talked about service projects, and we also incorporated what the current Girl Scouts are currently doing in our own communities, so we can reach out to them as leaders in our own troops in our neighborhoods.
Great. Well, one of the fortunate things about having you in leadership is, and having you from a Glendale legislative district, is we have a lot of opportunities for you to be involved and to influence legislation. And one of the things in particular that I have enjoyed working with you is, as each bill is passing through your office, either as through the committees you have leadership on, or in your leadership position as Senate Majority Leader, the conversation about bills is never about, oh, is this a good Republican bill, or is this a good... The dialogue that you and I always have as the representative from Glendale is, what does this do to Glendale, or how does this impact Glendale? How is this going to impact the community? And I've always appreciated those type of conversations that we've had, and you've been recognized as one of those legislators that really speaks up on behalf of the district that you represent and the people that you're down there advocating for. And kind of what, you know, there's lots of different models and roles people can take down at the legislature. Why has that been important to you, to be someone that really was focused on the district and the cities and the areas that you represent? I
think it goes back to the fact that I really am a policy wonk at heart. And so the policy is truly what I am interested in, not so much the partisan aspect of any particular piece of legislation. And so the policy that we are looking at in any particular bill is the most important to me. And that's why I ran. It's because I really felt that we had members at the legislature who were kind of voting in block because their party was doing that. And while that's important in some certain, you know, aspects, it is important to take a look at a bill's policy because it doesn't matter to the extent where your party is affiliated. It's about the policy and the people that it will affect. And the people that it affects is not only the people in my district, in District 20, but everyone in Arizona. And so I go through bills very, very carefully. I read every single one of them. You can ask people down at the legislature. In fact, sometimes I have members ask me what the bill is doing. And it goes back to my time as a Senate research analyst, where it was my job to read through every single bill that came to my desk and create that summary form, one sheet, get it, you know, right on point to what the bill is doing and how the bill is going to affect this great state. That is really what bills are about down at the legislature. So when I see any particular bill, I will hone in not only on how it affects Arizona, but is it going to affect the residents who elected me in the Northwest Phoenix area as well as Glendale? In those communities, if I see, for instance, that the city of Glendale has signed in to oppose a bill I'm going to pay a little attention to why that bill might not be good for the city residents of Glendale. And you have seen, you and I have worked together alongside each other very closely when there has been legislation, particularly, let's just talk about economic development, which is a critical area, which we both agree on. I believe if we have legislation that is going to create a consumer protection issue or a public safety issue, we have to go through that bill very, very carefully. And in this legislation, I think that once I saw City of Glendale oppose a particular bill, there and other cities came alongside and opposed the bill, I started asking questions a little bit more carefully about why this bill was there being considered and how we could amend it or get it to a point where everyone would be comfortable. And that is the place where legislators have the opportunity to amend a bill. So even though we can introduce, or anyone can introduce a bill however they do, we have two chambers. We have the House and we have the Senate. And if a bill starts in the House and it comes to the Senate might have new, fresh eyes to look at a piece of legislation and be able to have the opportunity to amend it before it goes to the governor. That's why we have the checks and balances in place. And I do take that role very seriously. Sometimes I'll sit on a committee in the Senate and, maybe a new member of the House comes in to testify, and all of a sudden we're asking questions about the bill. And it's interesting. It's like, well, there were no questions in the House, so it becomes sort of a surprise. I think that's the best part of policymaking, is when you have more eyes, more public, the ability for the public to testify on pieces of legislation and the transparency of it. It's very important that individuals from various interest groups take a look at legislation very, very carefully. And if we only had one chamber, we wouldn't have the ability to take a look at it with new, fresh eyes in the other chamber. So I do take that real seriously. I do love that the Senate really has a great team. I work very closely with my Republican caucus as well as the Democrat caucus, and we go through issues very well together. And as the Senate Majority Leader, I do keep my caucus members apprised of things that are happening so they're not surprised. And I, as a courtesy, will work with my Minority Leader and give her a heads up whenever we have an issue come to the floor that might be controversial. I'll just say, hey, just so you know, this is going to happen today. And I think that working relationship really works out very well and is appreciated on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely. So, is there anything, as now that you're in leadership, you have several sessions under your belt now at the state legislature, is there anything that you've learned after these many years of experiences that you wish you would have known when you were walking in as a freshman legislator that would have helped you at that point?
Sure. Well, I think it's always important to bring in everyone, all of the stakeholders, no matter what position you personally hold, if you are carrying a bill forward. So as I introduce a bill, for instance, I introduced a bill that just this last session, and I knew who the natural opponents of that bill would be, because you just kind of know based on an issue who would be for it and who would be against it. So rather than work the bill knowing my opponents are just kind of going to be following the bill and continuing to oppose it, I decided, why start there? Let's start with them on board. So I invited the natural opponents of this particular policy issue to the table before I even dropped the bill and created the bill. I asked them to help me develop the bill. And I showed them how we could bring them on board. And they had their insight, their input, they put draft language in, they worked with the advocates on the other side. So all of this was done in our interim period when we are not in session, so that when session did come in January, we had a prepared bill that had everyone on board. And going into the legislative session and being able to drop a bill, I was very proud of that effort, because it was it allowed for the natural opponents to say, hey, thank you for the opportunity. We'd much rather be on a bill than off of a bill. Yeah. But it created a better piece of legislation in my mind, because it really did take any of the holes that might have been there, and we took a careful look at them, really well before the bill was dropped. And even in the process of that particular bill going through the legislative process, I still amended it. I was still open to that, but I would always go back to my stakeholders to see if they were okay with it, because they put so much effort into that. Anyways, I think that is really the best way to create policy, is with as many people as possible. I would have, if I had known that early on, I think I could have, created better legislation rather than having it worked through during the legislative process when everything is so chaotic.
Right.
Doing that early on is a good way to get things done.
Well, and that stakeholder process at the end of the day results in good public policy.
It does.
And sometimes it results in no bills or no public policy. I
Right.
mean, we've had instances in this last session where we were
Right.
working on an issue that came up where it wasn't a stakeholder process. We didn't have the input.
Yeah.
You asked the question that you always ask, how is this impacting Glendale? How is this going to impact
Right.
the citizens? And we gave you some information. At the end of the day, we were able to work out some issues without having
That's
a
right.
bill, without having a new law, without growing government or the bureaucracy or any of that stuff. So those stakeholder engagements are critical to this process as well.
They are.
Let's talk a little bit about what your remaining priorities are. I mean, we finished this last legislative session. You were a part of leadership. You were able to get some bills over the last few years introduced. Are there any major issues that you will be carrying over the next few years that remaining on your priority list?
Well, you know, as Senate Majority Leader, there aren't a lot of bills that we carry, you know, because we're dealing with so many other things. So the bills that I pick are very carefully chosen.
Sure.
I haven't determined which bills I will carry for our next legislative session, but I will tell you that I will continue to work diligently on issues dealing with economic development for our state, because that is so important for creating jobs and creating the dollars that we need to create a robust economy. That is something that has always been a priority, having come from a family of small business owners, being a small business owner with my husband. Those are issues that are natural for me, and it also creates the workplace environment that we need for our citizens in Arizona. And when I go knock on doors during campaign season, people want to have jobs. You know, I mean, that is really an important thing.
Yeah.
Always critical that we have a focus on our schools, on our students in our classrooms, ensuring that they have the resources that they need, particularly our teachers. As the daughter of a public school teacher, it wasn't right for my mother to have to go to garage sales to buy her supplies.
Wow.
When we would take a look at her administration office, and they had all this fancy computer stuff with copy makers that were working, yet the small little school had a broken copy maker, and they were without. Those are where we have to take a really careful look at where we're spending our dollars in the classroom. I've worked on legislation and will continue to ensure that we have transparency in our budgets, whether they be at the local level as well as at our state level, so that the public can see how their money is being spent. They earn these dollars. They're hardworking citizens. They have jobs. They come home. They need to, feed their families. But what comes out in their government needs to reflect their priorities, and the needs need to be met. If we are wasting any of that money, or if that money is not being used wisely, we need to have taxpayer watchdogs like myself to be able to say, hey, we've got to stop that practice. We've got to downsize that department, or we need to get rid of a particular board or commission that isn't being effective to the regulatory environment for our businesses. Those are issues that I think we have to take a careful look at every year, and I'll continue to be an advocate for all of those things.
Great. And so if citizens want to get a hold of you, you're always available by email, phone calls to your office.
Yes.
And you're always so very responsive to everyone. So we would encourage all citizens as they're either outside of a legislative session, or if they have issues or questions or concerns, you're certainly one of those leaders down at the legislature that's available, accessible to citizens, and would encourage everyone to contact you. So, well, thank you for joining us today. I certainly enjoyed the conversation, and that wraps up today's episode of Your Legislative Link. If you'd like to gather more information about how to contact Senator Kimberly Yee, you can visit our Intergovernmental Programs website at glendale.az/intergovernmental. There's information about the whole Glendale delegation, as well as information about federal officials, how to get involved, the way bills are introduced, and how they become law. So please visit that website. And until next time, we hope you have a great day. Thank you.